Invigor Book and Buy ends November 14th. Run, don't walk to invigorbookandbuy.ca to find out how to get $30 off per bag. Terms and conditions apply.
You're listening to Ruminating with RealAg, the podcast that chews on the latest in beef production, with your host, Amber Bell.
I'm Amber Bell, and this is Ruminating with RealAg. For today's episode, I will have Dr. Reynold Bergen joining me. Now, Reynold is with the Beef Cattle Research Council, BCRC, and he's their science director. So we're going to be talking about cow-calf practice adoption rates. And this goes back to a survey that was done last year regarding the adoption rates. And we're going to be talking about what practices have been adopted, maybe why practices may be lagging behind in adoption rates. And yeah, it'll be a great conversation. So I hope you enjoy. Hi, Reynold. It is fantastic to talk to you today.
Good to talk to you.
So we're going to be talking about cow-calf practice adoption rates. Now, there was not the inaugural study that was put out last year, I believe. Is that right?
Oh, it was a few years ago now. Yeah, I think it's 2017, maybe.
Okay, and there's some interesting findings in that. But before we really get in there, why don't you tell us a little bit about who BCRC is, what you do, and how your work connects back to producers?
Yeah, sure. So the BCRC is the Beef Cattle Research Council. We're an industry group, and we're funded by the National Checkoff. So that's the $2.50 non-refundable checkoff that every Canadian producer pays when they sell cattle. So that checkoff funds a couple of different things, but around 65 cents of that $2.50 comes to us. And we use that funding to do a couple of things. Our mandate is to fund research and extension that'll support research and innovation, support the competitiveness and sustainability of the industry. So we fund research all across the country, mostly with universities, Agriculture Canada. And the other thing we do is we fund extension to turn the results of that research into information and tools that producers can use. And we're funded by producers, and so all of the projects that we fund are chosen by the producers who sit on the BCRC.
That extension piece is so important, bringing it back so people can use this research on their farms. So I love that you guys do that. So what kinds of research or extension projects is BCRC currently focusing on, and how do you guys decide the priorities?
Oh God, we got a lot of them. On the research side, like we fund a lot of stuff. We've got about 100 projects, research projects going on at any given time, and some of those are small 1-year projects just to see if an idea makes sense, all the way up to big, huge 5-year projects. And that research runs the gamut from forage and grassland productivity, so a lot of forage breeding and management, that sort of thing. Feed grains and feed efficiency, so feed grain breeding, alternative feeds, byproducts, that kind of stuff, more feedlot focused. Environmental sustainability, so all manner of greenhouse gas and carbon sequestration and biodiversity and water use stuff. Animal health and welfare, so tons of AMR, respiratory disease, liver abscess, cow-calf surveillance, pain control, transport research, and then beef quality, so grading, meat quality, and food safety, which is mostly about helping packing plants control pathogens like E. coli 0157. So that's research, and those priorities are laid out in something called a National Beef Research and Tech Transfer Strategy. And that's this thing that we lead the development of. And it breaks down the outcomes that Canada's beef industry wants to achieve and how we want research to help achieve it in all of those 6 priority areas I just went through. And so that strategy, we don't just write it and then it's eternal. We renew this thing every 5 years to keep it current, and we're right in the middle of that right now, as a matter of fact. And so that priority setting process involves our producer council, of course, but also a bunch of producers who don't sit on the BCRC, researchers who understand the industry, a lot of veterinarians, nutritionists, forage companies, packers, pharma reps, you name it, other funders too, including government funders. And that's important, having those other government funders involved, because we want other funders to buy into this strategy, because if we all agree on the same priorities, it's easier for us as an industry to get government funders to co-fund projects with us. And if we can match our dollars, our producer dollars, 1-to-1 with a government funder, then our producer dollars go twice as far. And if we match them 3-to-1, they go 4 times as far, that kind of thing. So it uses our producer dollars more efficiently. It helps them go farther, and it gets more research funded that benefits the industry. And so, when we tell researchers that we're open for business and we're looking for research ideas, it's that national strategy that guides what they submit to us, and it guides us as we decide what to fund. And so that's kind of how we go about doing it. We've got a pretty thorough process to evaluate projects. It's the council that decides which ones we fund ultimately, and we fund about 1 out of 4 we fund about 1 out of every 4 projects that comes to us, and so we cull pretty hard. And then on the extension side, what that team does is it takes the results of the stuff we fund, and they scour the research community for other relevant information that's relevant to Canada, that's relevant to the question at hand, and tries to turn all those scientific facts that we can rely on into useful tools for producers.
That is a lot of different topics, and I feel like we could talk all day long, probably, if we were to drill down into every one of them. But we're going to focus on the cow-calf survey, because that is one of your extension efforts at the BCRC. Yeah. So what were some of the highlights of what producers are and aren't adopting, and why did BCRC want to dig into that?
So that adoption rate report, we did an online survey in late 2023, early 2024, and over 600 people responded to it, which is fantastic. The vast majority of them were producers. And there were like 70 questions in there, I think. So it took a little bit of time to go through there. So if you're listening to this and you participated, thanks. This sort of thing is a numbers game. And so the more responses we get, the better, the more reliable the results are. Anyhow, we took all those survey responses. We took a bunch of responses from other surveys that other people had done and other research studies that relied on big numbers from lots of producers, about 18 of them altogether, piled all that stuff together, and then compared that to the last time we did it, and that's what turned into this adoption rates report. So the reason we did that is that, we fund research and we fund extension, and that report helps us to do both of those things better. So if our research strategy is a map that tells us where we want to go, the adoption rate report that we're talking about today tells us whether producers are responding to our extension efforts. So it's kind of one of those things where if the strategy is the map, then this adoption rate report tells us what the terrain's like, so we can adjust both our research priorities and our extension efforts to meet industry needs.
I really like that. It's a little bit of a scorecard then.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great.
So what's
No, that's fair. Then you wouldn't need me. So what stood out to you most in the results in the survey? Were there any surprises, either in what producers are doing well or what still needs work?
Oh yeah, there's a ton on both ends. I think, I already mentioned this, but I think one of the things that really stood out was that producers are getting asked to do surveys all the time, and they hate doing it. And so, the fact that we had 600 people who are willing to take the time to answer 70 questions about 30 different production practices, it is really, it makes us feel good that people are taking our stuff seriously.
So that was the big surprise?
That was one of the big surprises. And, I imagine we'll talk about some of the different things that we were surveying on. Some of those were a little surprising too, but.
Right. And so there were some regional differences in that. And I always find that interesting. I get very interested by the way people operate. And so with that, some of them were higher pregnancy checking and rotational grazing rates in the West compared to the East. So what do you think is behind that gap?
well, I think probably the size of the country. I mean, preg
What is that?
checking, yes, but you probably want a little more detail. The preg checking is a lot more common in the West and a lot less common in the East. I suspect part of that is related to differences in the breeding season, because we asked about that too. So the breeding season from BC to Saskatchewan averaged around 90 days. But then when we looked at the East, it ranged from 114 to 141 days, and Manitoba's kind of right in the middle. And so the point of that is that the average Eastern cow is exposed to the bull for a couple of extra cycles, so they have more chances to get bred. And so that's probably why they're maybe a little less concerned about preg checking, because the bull cows are exposed longer, they're probably more likely to be bred. And we see see that in open rates too, right? Those Western cows are exposed to the bulls for less days, and so there's more open cows than in the East. And so I think that's probably what's going on, is that Western producers are more likely to preg check just so that they're not carrying open cows through the winter, especially when feed's short, which, is not uncommon in the West. So that longer breeding season gets more cows bred in the East, but it also means they're calving for a lot longer and weaning lighter calves in the East. So, cows in Western Canada are weaning over 40% of their body weight. Cows in the East are weaning a lot less.
Do you think that also impacts the rotational grazing rates?
Um, I yeah, I think rotational grazing rates are yeah, it's probably a weather related too, right? It's probably a whole bunch of things. In the east, like there's more rain, right? So pastures are more productive and water is less scarce, and so it makes a lot more sense to be able to cross fence and whatnot when water is less of a concern. I think out here with out in the West, where pastures are an awful lot bigger and moisture is a lot harder to come by, it's a different economic calculation when it comes to the infrastructure costs.
Hmm. And so when it comes to practices like preg checking, body condition scoring, or mineral programs, what do you think holds some producers back from adopting them?
We asked that actually. We asked producers why they don't preg check, and the most common answer, about a third of them, said that they could tell who was pregnant. We didn't ask what that means. I'm assuming that means that they're keeping an eye on who's riding after the bulls have been pulled. And other reasons are that some producers are just waiting to sell their opens in spring anyhow, because that's when cow prices are generally higher in spring than they are in fall. Um, Others don't see preg checking as profitable, which might be the case if you're confident that your open rates are low, or if you have a ton of feed anyway, or you're pretty sure that cow prices are going to go up over the course of the winter. But in a drought year, all those things can change, right? So it can be a year by year decision, and some producers are way too busy farming at that time of year. Others, it's labor shortages or facilities or vet shortages, that kind of stuff. Um, in terms of body condition scoring, we asked about that. Why don't you do that? And 60% of producers who don't use hands-on body condition scoring think that visual appraisal's good enough. But that can be visual appraising can be pretty misleading, right? Like a black-hided cow with a long winter coat on can look an awful lot fatter than she really is, especially when she's in the shade or a long ways off. And so, they always say that black is a slimming color, but it works the opposite way with cows. It's a lot harder to see all the juts and angles on a skinny cow when she's black and has long hair or in the shade or far away. So, hands-on body condition scoring is a lot more accurate than eyeballs, but that's where labor shortages and poor facilities can play into it. So I think that's where the hesitation comes from. But, most cows are going through this chute at some point in fall for something. So, why not lay your hands on them? It's not a hard thing to do. And the BCRC has resources to help producers learn how to do that if you don't know how.
Well, and I think the nice part about doing that with hands-on would then it'd be really easy to put records down on what she looked like going into the fall. So if you know that she goes into the winter skinny every single year, then maybe it's nothing to worry about, just the way she handles things.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and also knowing that going into winter, might give you a bit of a sense on, how to feed which group to put it in to feed it differently, right?
And how about mineral programs?
Probably a couple of different things, because we asked about that as well, and I think, um, well, my cows look healthy, so why would I worry about minerals? That's, I think, one of the common thinking, or common approaches. But the challenge with that is that even cows with mineral deficiencies could look perfectly healthy, right? Because the signs of those deficiencies can be really, really subtle. But if that results in a reproductive wreck because, high sulfate levels in water started to mess with what their copper they were getting through the feed, all of a sudden those healthy cows that come back open can be really, really costly.
Mm-hmm.
But minerals are costly too, so sometimes producers would rather roll the dice, especially if they've never had a problem before. So, sometimes these are lessons that get learned the hard way, right? I mean, the stuff is tricky because producers are real experts across a really broad range of things in a really complex industry, and they really do care deeply about their cattle. So, but with that many balls in the air, it can help to send out timely reminders that, hey, this is an unusual situation in terms of drought or cold or whatever. So, business as usual management practices might need a tweak. And here's a few things you might want to think about. And that's what we try to do.
Do you think that any of that might have to do to, especially when I'm thinking mineral, it there's so much on the market and sometimes it can feel like you're being sold a whole lot of product that may or may not have return.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's a concern. I think when somebody's trying to convince you of something and they have a financial um, stake in you making that decision, it behooves you to do your research, right? And that's where, traditional extension really came into it with the regional ag reps and all the rest of it, but they're not around anymore. And so getting that
Mhm.
unbiased information is tougher, and it can be tougher to look that stuff up yourself on the web if you're not pretty technically astute. And so that's the gap that we're trying to help
Working to
fill.
fill.
Yeah.
Hmm. Some practices like vaccination have great uptake, while others like two-stage or low stress weaning are still limited. Why do you think that might be?
Yeah, boy, vaccinations have really climbed over the years. Like in this most recent survey, over 94% of herds said they were vaccinating for at least something. And of course that varies by animal type, cows, bulls, calves, and the disease in question. But but it really stood out to me, when we think of bovine respiratory disease, we often think of that as a feedlot disease. But over 90% of cow-calf producers were vaccinating against the BRD viruses, and even more than they were vaccinating for BVD. But, BRD is often, it's, actually the most common reason for treating calves on pasture before weaning. So if I'm a cow-calf producer, then vaccinating those calves helps to prevent problems for me. Um, the weaning question's a little bit different, right? And actually, the survey said that about half of Canadian producers are using some sort of low stress weaning. About half of them are using traditional weaning, so pulling the cows right off the cow all at the same time and shipping the calves right away. And that's what, the most common reason that producers do that is typically, you know, close to two-thirds of them who do that say it's because I sell the calves right away.
Hmm.
Um, but if only half of them are doing that, that means that half of them are using some sort of low stress, the nose tags or fence line weaning or something. And that 50-50 split has been pretty stable since the last survey. So I was kind of surprised that low stress weaning is as high as it was. I think one of the things holding that back is partly it's a bunch of things, right? Partly it's facilities on pasture, right? If you're going to stick the nose tags in and then put the calves back with the cows and then haul them in again to take them out a week later, labor will play into that. I think sometimes there's concerns if you leave those tags in the nose too long, you can get lesions. If you don't have time to get back and take them out within a week. So it's time, it's labor, it's facilities. But again, 50% of producers say they're using some sort of low stress weaning, and that's good news for the calves and for the industry's reputation.
Definitely. Rotational grazing and extended grazing practices were other topics that were in that report. They're showing that they've leveled off or even dropped a bit. So what do you think the main challenges are there?
Yeah, so that's actually something we didn't ask about in our survey. And the reason we didn't was because we knew that other surveys were asking that. So, why ask the same question, duplicate everything? So that data all came from the federal ag census and living labs groups and stuff. But anyway, that helped keep our surveys shorter. But one of the challenges I think with rotational grazing is partly, well, what does rotational grazing mean? Right? It doesn't have it means different things to different people. Right. So if I calve in one pasture and then I move them to a summer pasture and leave them there till weaning, like, is that rotational grazing? It might depend who you ask, right? And others consider rotational grazing to that really intensive, like moving them daily or every couple of days or monthly, or all the way to adaptive multi-paddock grazing and all the rest of it. It's savory grazing and stuff. So there's no common definition. I think that's part of the problem. But anyway, a couple of things that probably hold rotational grazing back are like those infrastructure costs that I mentioned around fencing or water if you don't have it already. And that's especially probably a challenge in BC, where the fences keep burning down, or, the southern prairies where pastures are huge and water's hard to come by, or, people that are renting land, right, where no one necessarily has the incentive to improve it. So it'll be interesting to see over the next couple of years if virtual fencing really comes to life. There's a lot of promise for that if it works. I think extended grazing is a bit of a different story. I think some of that is about wildlife getting at the feed before your cows can, right? So I think producers that are in areas where wildlife have become a problem are tending to switch back a little bit more to hay and silage, but they're still not feeding them in the corral or hauling the silage or the bales out to the cow and delivering it there. So it costs more than swath grazing or stockpiling or what have you, but the manure savings are still there, and the cows are getting more of the feed than the deer are, and so that strategy can also lend itself a little better to delivering supplemental feed into the animals that need it, right? So I think that those things all play into it.
And I think that's really interesting too, because depending on what area of the country or the province you're in, up north there's a lot of large elk herds, and from the growers and producers that I've talked to up there, they have a lot harder time with, let's say, bale grazing and leaving all their bales out in the field because they'll just be decimated by the time the cows get to them. Yeah. Whereas where I am, which is kind of around the Edmonton area, it's really easy to do. There's not large herds that are going to go and decimate your bales. So I think you're right. I think that plays a really big role in extended grazing.
Yeah.
Feed and water testing rates are quite different across regions. So what kind of return do you think those offer, especially for smaller or more extensive operations?
Oh, there's no one size fits all answer to that one. Like, regardless of what kind of operation you've got or size or anything. But as far as feed goes, I think just because your cattle did well on last year's feed doesn't mean that this year's feed is going to be the same. And that's true whether it's just a change in year, because year to year weather changes will affect the quality of the forage. Especially, you plant 50-50 grass alfalfa, but 10 years later, it's not going to be 50-50 grass alfalfa anymore, right? There's going to be a lot more grass probably. And also, if you happen to be in one of those drought areas and you're buying feed in because of drought, it's not your feed that you're using. So last year's performance isn't going to be predictive of this year. And so it's another case. It's sort of like body condition scoring where looks can be deceiving. You can certainly tell if feed is lush and green or dry and brown, but that color doesn't tell you very much about the energy or the protein or the mineral content or the digestibility. I've heard stories from veterinarians about cows starving with nice green feed in front of them. But when they tested it, it was just nothing but fiber. And so if your cows can't digest it or if there's not enough nutrition in it, it won't do them any good. And the only way to know that is to test it. And water's sort of similar. Like the water in your house might be fine, but if your cows are on a different well, the water could be quite different, even if it's nearby. And those mineral imbalances in the water can interfere and bind up nutrients that the cows are getting from the diet and causing significant problems. So, dugout water quality, same thing. It can vary from one year to the next, or even within the same grazing season. That's especially true in a drought, right? Because water will evaporate, but then it leaves all the minerals and sulfates and salt and stuff behind, and so those will concentrate, and that can affect intake and health and all the rest of it. So, the dugout might be the same from year to year or month to month, but the water isn't necessarily. So anyway, we developed a whole bunch of calculators and information that's all on beefresearch.ca that can help producers figure out the whys and hows of water and feed testing. And, it is complete with economic calculators and a bunch of producer testimonials, right? Because it's one thing to hear from the experts, but it can be pretty compelling to hear from a producer who's had experience. And so we try to work a bunch of that stuff in.
And so record keeping, that's something that I really see the logic in. However, I have to say I am terrible at it. So record keeping seems to be one of the slower areas to modernize. Why do you think digital tools haven't taken off faster?
Oh boy, that's probably complex. It's probably individual. It's probably partly generational. I have a smartphone, but I spend most of my time on the computer and I don't download a lot of apps but I work in the office, right? A lot of my younger coworkers, which is all of my coworkers, they're the opposite, right? They're very digital, right? So some of that's probably going to change over time. I mean, rural internet access isn't always available or reliable, and not everybody trusts computers, and your calving book won't crash. So there's some trust issues probably there, but technology is getting better all the time, and adoption of digital tools is increasing, especially among younger producers, more business focused, and Eastern producers. We're seeing that too.
hmm have you seen whether or not there are producers that are maybe writing in the traditional calving book and then transferring that information to digitalize it?
Oh, I bet that's a lot of them. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So not with a laptop out at the shoot.
I would doubt that. Yeah.
Okay.
I've never seen it, but
No.
who knows? I'm sure they're out there. Someone will tell me I'm wrong.
For someone running a typical cow-calf herd, what's the minimum kind of record keeping that can still make a meaningful difference?
Yeah, it doesn't need to be complex, right?
hmm
There's one concept called the gold system, which is mainly about reproductive performance, which of course is one of the most economically hugely important things on any cow-calf operation. So gold is a 4-letter acronym. G is for growth or weaning weight, and O is for open rates, L is for length of the calving season, and D is for death loss in the calves. So they're all pretty economically relevant. And so if your numbers are higher than industry benchmark, so say if more than 7% of your cows are open, or your calving period's longer than 63 days, or more than 4% of your calves are dying, it'll give you a sense of kind of what management levers to start looking at pulling and adjusting. So those are pretty simple things to measure, but they can get you a long way in terms of improving herd performance and productivity and profitability. So, BCRC has developed a bunch of resources to help producers get started with record keeping, and those are designed kind of simple, moving more complex. So start with collecting some pretty basic key information and gradually become more complex as your comfort and interest grows. So I don't know, if I was starting from scratch, I'd probably try starting with something that was interesting to me or important to me, because if it's either interesting or important, I'm way more likely to stick with it. And then once you've kind of got that habit worked in and you start to see some benefits from keeping those records, then maybe start tracking the next thing on your list. So, we've developed a couple of courses on record keeping, specialized for forage and grazing management, one for animal health, one for genetics. So kind of different interests, and there's going to be more to come. But keeping records is really, really important, but that's only half of it, right? If you collect records but you don't use them, there's really not much point. It's kind of like testing your feed, but then not adjusting your feeding program based on what it says. So it's kind of back to that gold program, right? Collect your data, look at your numbers, compare them to what the industry standards are, and try to figure out where you have the opportunities to improve, and then look for information to help you get where you want to be.
Right, right. And in general, from your perspective, what are some of the biggest barriers to adopting new management practices? So we've kind of hit on some of them, I think, but if you could wrap that up into like a statement.
Yeah, well, it's individual, but I think producers are probably most likely to adopt new practices if they're easy to implement, if they're not too costly, and if they save time or money.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. And then if you were to pick 2 or 3 practices that you think could make the biggest impact on herd efficiency or profitability, which would you choose?
It's going to depend on the situation, obviously, but I think if you're not already collecting some of those simple records, I'd probably start there.
Mhm.
I'd say if you're not using implants in your calves, I would start $2 implant that gives you 20 pounds. What are calves selling for this fall, right? It's a huge return on investment. It's easy. It doesn't take much time. And the last one I would indicate is make use of your veterinarian. This vet shortage is real. So if you've got a veterinarian that you work well with, take that relationship seriously. It's kind of more of a mindset thing, but vets are more than drug salesmen, right? Your veterinarian knows stuff. She knows a lot of stuff. And if she's been around for a while, she's highly educated. She sees a lot of operations in your area. She knows what works, and she's trained to solve problems, probably seen your problem before. And if not, working with you to solve that problem is going to both help you and her deal with it again the next time. But sometimes there's new veterinarians that come along, right? So if you've got a new veterinarian, like, they may lack some practical experience, but then you've got a chance to help them learn what's important to you. And if you're a good patient and a good client, you can help them develop into a really strong resource for you in the future. But if a new vet has customers that are rude or impatient, why wouldn't they go to the city to get paid more to work on pets, right? It never hurts, and it often helps to be kind, and, client appreciation goes both ways. So that's a bit of a rant, but veterinarians, I think, are sometimes undervalued.
I think that's a really good point. And I mean, I think of even like our area has a selenium deficiency. And if you work with the same vet all the time, they know, okay, hey, you are having these problems with your cattle. You know what? This area is deficient in this or that. And they might be able to speak into that where a producer might not if you're speaking with another producer.
Well, for sure, because nobody wants to admit their own problems, right?
Hmm.
But a vet sees those problems, and they may not say, "Hey, yeah, Amber's had problems with
That
this. I know how to
person.
fix you," right? But they've got experience, they got knowledge. Use them.
Hmm.
They want to help.
For producers listening who want to make one improvement this year, what's a realistic place to start? I mean, you mentioned record keeping and things, but let's say an on the ground improvement.
Yeah, well, I would say, boy, there's been a lot of drought in large parts of this country. I mean, not right where I am, but there's been regions that have been in drought for a few years now. My in-laws are in the Maritimes, and they hardly ever get droughts, but they had a really severe one this year. And things like drought can really affect feed quality, and feed quality really affects fertility and animal health. So I would say feed testing, take that one seriously. We've got a bunch of resources to help you get started, and they're designed to help you figure out, you know, when you need to call an expert, and also identify the best way to match the feed that you've got to what your herd needs over the course of the winter, whether you need to supplement and what you need to supplement, that kind of thing.
That's a good one. Um, we talked about vets a little bit already, but what role do vets, peer networks, and extension, of course, play in helping producers try new ideas?
Oh, huge. They're huge. Um, Different people learn differently, of course. Some producers are keen to try whatever's new and test it on a small scale for themselves and figure out if it works. Some producers like to learn from other producers. Some like to go to in-person extension events like the ones the regional forage groups host all the time. And those are huge, those
Mhm.
peer-to-peer learning opportunities. Some parts of the countries have beef clubs. Some producers look for information online, but vets are an enormous one. They're often the go-to for producers for questions about, even things veterinarians don't have much training in, like nutrition or genetics and pasture management. Like, they don't take a bunch of classes on that in vet school, but they're getting the questions from producers. And so one of the things that we've been trying to do is we put out a lot of information, and we have a lot of producers who use our stuff, but we have even more producers who don't use our stuff and don't know who we are, even though they are funding us. And so we're trying to get stuff into their hands by working to develop resources that'll help the veterinarians, right? They may not come to us, but they probably are going to their veterinarian. And so if they go to their veterinarian and say, hey, I need some help, and by the way, what can you tell me about how to seed my pasture? Then if we can provide those resources to the vet, it can get to the producer that way. And that strategy works really, really well because it helps the vet and it who's getting the questions anyway, and it does get the information right to the producer. So
Forage organizations, I think that's a good point too, because they've been definitely an excellent help on my journey through learning about cattle. And I think that would be something that I would say like reach out to them because usually there are events and stuff happening. You just have to put in that little bit of effort of making initial contact.
oh yeah, no, and those forage people, by God, they are passionate.
That's for sure. They really are. Looking ahead, what changes or new trends do you expect we'll see in the next few years based on the report and in general?
Oh, I have no idea. I'm the science guy. It's my coworkers who are actually the extension people who put together all this useful producer information. So they're ultimately the ones who are going to comb through all this and work together with a bunch of other people all across the all across the country, other extension people, and figure out, okay, here's probably the best opportunities that'll benefit the most producers. So I'm kind of dodging your question, but these people all have a really good eye and they're really effective. And I'll give you an example. So a couple of years ago, Claire Windier, who was at the University of Calgary Vet School, she did a project looking at calf resuscitation techniques and did a whole bunch of producer surveying and stuff. And she found out that half of the producers she talked to in Alberta about dummy calves, these calves that are born that are just trying to die. Um, Asked them, how do you bring these things back to life? And half of them thought that it would an effective way to help these newborn calves breathe was to hang them upside down over a gate, because that helps drain their lungs, and then they can breathe better. And that's the perception. It might look like a good way to clear out the lungs, but that's not what's happening. Fluid is draining out, but that's all coming from the guts, not the lungs. And the way calves are built is if you hang them upside down, the guts push on the lungs and actually makes it harder to breathe. And so you're actually harming them. Better way to resuscitate these calves is to rub them really vigorously, or stick straw in their nose, or pour water in their ears so they shake their heads. So coming to a point here. So this extension team that I worked with, they worked with Claire. They put together a bunch of resources about here's how you should keep these new calves alive, and sent all those resources out into the world. And when we asked people about this in our most recent survey about how to resuscitate calves, the proportion of producers who thought that hanging calves upside down was a good idea had dropped from 50% down to about a third, so half to a
Wow.
third. And that's just in Alberta. The other provinces were even lower. And that's a pretty big change in less than 5 years. And so my point is that when it's easy and it's inexpensive and it helps the animals, producers are going to adopt it when they're aware of it. When they know what, the better thing to do, they'll do it. So anyway, whatever our team decides to push on, they will put a lot of work into it, a lot of thought into it. They'll work with the right experts, develop some really great stuff, and get the word out really effectively.
On that story, let's just quickly touch on pain control, because that's one we haven't yet. So talk to me a little bit about that and maybe how that's changed or what you hope to see.
Oh, yeah. So pain drugs are relatively new. I think they only first started coming out, hitting the market in, I don't know, don't quote me, 2015 or something. And so when we first started surveying producers about do you use pain control, hardly anybody was, because there was just nothing they could use. And in our most recent survey, it's really shot up. Like the last time we did this survey, for dehorning, like dehorning's a bit less of a deal, right? Because there's so many polled cattle out there anyway. About 80% of herds are all or mostly polled. But when it comes to dehorning, last time we did this survey, only about 50% of producers said they were using any pain drugs for dehorning. Now it's up to 70. So that's a pretty big jump. And then castration's a bigger deal, right? Because half of the calves are going to get castrated. And the last time we did this survey, there was less than 13% of producers said they always used pain drugs. Up to 90% said they never did. Now there's 26% of producers use it all the time. So these are relatively new products, and the cow calf industry especially has a reputation for being really slow and to adopt new things. But I think this really is a good news story because there's no performance benefit to using these things. If you provide pain drugs at branding time or what have you, your weaning weights aren't going to go up. They will be easier to move, to summer pasture or what have you, but there's no real clear economic benefit to it. So, like, to me, it's a really good news story because producers are paying out of their pocket for something that helps the calves, but it doesn't necessarily put dollars right back in their pocket. So, producers are putting their money where their mouth is in this case, and that's a really good news story for the industry.
It really shows how much producers actually care about their livestock.
Absolutely.
It's something that costs them money, doesn't necessarily give them back anything.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, and don't get me wrong. I mean, the BCRC isn't taking credit for everybody or for the adoption of pain control. That's a lot of veterinarians and even the companies that are marketing it, just going out there and explaining it and demonstrating it. And what's really cool is, I've never talked to a producer who's used this stuff and then quit. Right? Once they start, they see a difference and they keep using it. So I'm thrilled about this.
That's terrific. I like it. And finally, if you could leave producers with one main takeaway from this report, what would it be?
Well, if you're paying checkoff, you help pay for everything that we're talking about here, right? So you may as well benefit from it. All of the research that we fund and all of the resources that we put together are online at beefresearch.ca. So, you or your spouse or your kid can look it up. And, if you subscribe to our mailing list at our website, you'll get email updates from us. once or twice a week about new stuff we're funding or the results of stuff that's been completed recently or new production information or tools or what have you that we've developed to help you decide whether a new production practice or an old one makes sense for your operation, notifications about upcoming webinars and all the rest of it. So I don't know, check it out at beefresearch.ca. You're paying for us and we appreciate it. Hopefully we're doing you some good.
It really is a terrific resource. I want to thank you so much for your time, Reynold. We could probably talk a lot longer on a lot of this stuff, but it was a great conversation, so thank you.
All right, thank you, Amber. Have a good day.